So what do you do when the appraisal comes in lower than the contract price when you're buying a home? Hi, this is Andrew with the Andrew Smith team of eXp Realty. And there's no doubt in the current market that we're in, the current real estate market that we're in, with very low supply and high demand, we've all seen it. There's bidding wars, multiple offers that are pushing the list prices well beyond, or pushing the sales prices, I should say, well beyond what the home was actually listed for. And this can create a problem when the list or when the eventual sales price is much higher than what the list price was. You can end up with something what is known as an appraisal gap. And it basically means that the appraised value and the contract value are not the same thing. So what is it that you're to do? So Sean Telford, he's the chief appraiser for CoreLogic, and he explained it similar to as I just stated. He said, recently we've observed buyers paying prices above list price and higher than the market data available to appraisers to support that price. The difference is known as the appraisal gap. So what causes it? What is it that actually happens here? And one of the things that when you're out looking, it's competitive, right? And you know that homes are selling for more than they're listed for. So what is it that you're to do? Because when a home is appraised, what the appraiser is actually looking for is actual closed sales. So past transactions that have happened to help support the price that you are now paying. But the challenge is, in a rapidly appreciating market like we've been seeing, it's not always possible for there to be enough closed transactions, enough closed sales data to support the price that you're now at. And that's where this appraisal gap happens. So you've got to understand, from the bank's perspective, the appraiser's perspective, they're out there looking to make sure that the bank isn't loaning more money against the property than the property is actually worth. And it's tricky. It's very, very hard in a rapidly appreciating market, because even though you may have overpaid what the appraiser says right now, give it a month or two and there's going to be a sale higher than yours. And now yours will be used as one of the comparables for the next appraiser. So Dustin Harris, he's an appraiser coach, and he said it recently. He goes, it's important for everyone to understand that the appraiser's job in the end is to remain that unbiased third party, to truly tell the client what that home is worth in the current market, regardless of what decisions have been made on the price side of things. But let me restate that a little bit. That's from an appraisal coach, and I understand that's from the appraiser's perspective. But that also isn't necessarily the reality of the market that we're in currently, when there is such low supply and high demand. You know that a home is worth whatever a qualified buyer is willing to pay for it, regardless of what the list price is, right? And if a home's listed for 500,000 and you write an offer at 530, right? And that could be that the closed sales support 520, 525, but not quite 530. Somebody else can come in right behind you and offer 540 or even 550. So what's the house actually worth? Well, in the eyes of the bank, it may be 525, but in the eyes of that other buyer, it's 550. So what's one to do, and how do you overcome that challenge? Well, in that, the important thing to remember is that in the current market here, it's going to be up to each individual. My suggestion for people when they go in is, the question always becomes, how much should we offer on this home? And my answer is always, I'm going to prepare the data that shows where I think the comparables are and where an appraisal is likely to come in, although I don't know for sure, but we're going to look at where it's likely to come in. But ultimately, it's going to be your decision on how much the home is worth to you, right? And that's going to be different for everyone. And in many cases, What we're seeing on average, according to the lenders that I've been working with and the transactions we've been involved in, is the appraisal on average is coming up somewhere between list price and contract price. Right. So again, go back to that $500,000 example. You may have offered 540. We're seeing the appraisal come in somewhere around about 520. So we've got this gap. So what exactly do we do for the gap? What does it mean to you as a buyer? Well, under normal market circumstances, right? If you had a property that was listed for 500, and let's say you wrote your offer at 500, it is normally expected that the listing agent, the agent working with the seller, they would have listed the property at a price that they felt confident in it could appraise for, right? So that's what you would expect. Doesn't always happen, but that's what you would expect. So in that case, let's say you offered the 500, the appraisal comes in at 490, which happens. Normally what would be then is the buyer would go back to the seller and say, hey, the appraisal came in low. We'd like to amend the contract to reduce the purchase price to 490. In many cases, that's exactly what happens. In some cases, it may be that buyer and seller agree that the appraiser may have missed something, there's no reason why it shouldn't have come in at 500, and they agree to split the difference. Okay, but in this market, that's not happening, because if you go back to the seller and say, I need you to reduce your price, the seller's just going to cancel the contract and go next, because he had 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 other offers behind you that are probably willing to come in and pay that price. So as a buyer, here's a couple of things that you need to keep in mind. When you write an offer, my recommendation is that you will always have some measure of protection, meaning you limit your exposure, right? And the way you do that is through what are known here in Texas anyway as appraisal waivers. There's a version of these in every state. In California, where we also operate, there's another version of this that you can use. And we'll go back to that $500,000 example. So the house is listed at 500, you write at 540. But when you work with your agent and you run the comparables, you actually think that there's a likelihood that maybe the house will appraise a little bit higher. Or you also think that, hey, I need to limit what I'm exposed to here. So I'm only willing to pay $20,000 over the price. So you're going to limit your exposure to $20,000 on top of appraised value. That would be something known as a partial waiver. You're partially waiving the appraisal to cover a certain amount over and above the actual appraised value if it comes in short of the contract price. The other way it's handled is in what's known as a full appraisal waiver. And we're seeing those a lot right now, but as a buyer understands what that means. That basically means on that $500,000 house, if the appraisal comes in right at 500 and your contract price is 540, you're going to have to make up that difference in cash on top of your down payment and on top of closing costs. This is in addition to. So it's important you keep that in mind, because those numbers can rack up very, very quickly. Likewise, what if the appraisal comes in at 490? Now you've got a $50,000 difference to make up, because no matter what the appraisal is, it's not giving you an option to cancel purely based on the appraised value. And so full appraisal waivers have been very, very common, but just make sure that you've run all your numbers, you've spoken to your lender, and you know exactly what your budget will allow and what you're comfortable with. Now, I will say what we are starting to see here is pricing flattening out a little bit. It's not just here in Texas, we're seeing it in other areas of the country. I was talking to my team in California just this past week, as well as an associate in Arizona, and he's saying the exact same thing. We are starting to see things flatten out just a little bit. That doesn't mean that we're seeing prices necessarily decline, although price reductions are up, but those are mainly occurring right now, at least in the markets we're operating in, on the homes that were listed way too high to begin with, hoping that the market was going to keep doing this And now that the market is kind of doing this, it's not going to get there. So they're having to bring those prices back down. So the important thing to know is that you do have options. It's important to stay informed. It's important to know the latest trends on where the market is going. Make sure you talk to your agent and work this situation out with them and your lender so that you've got a game plan going in to know what you can and can't do so you don't get stuck in an uncomfortable position. Anyway, I hope this information helps. If you have any other questions whatsoever, please feel free to reach out. You can always call me at 888-447-9650.